So, to the surprise of absolutely nobody who has been following Sword and Shield's metagame so far, Dynamaxing is completely ridiculous, and it is now banned. If you are intent on playing competitive singles this generation, this is a good thing, and I'm here to tell you why. Obviously, a lot of people have not just reservations, but just are virulently opposed to the idea of banning a generation's defining mechanic, but that is not a competitive mindset. And I know there's a lot of hysteria being peddled by Verlicify, and I don't know if that guy is putting on an act or if he's genuine. If he's genuine, then he makes a lot of really idiotic points. And if he's putting on an act, then he does a good job stirring the pot. But that's not what this is about. This is about competition. And if you want the best competition, then you cannot have something like Dynamax in the metagame. So, I will give you some context where I'm coming from so you know that I have some idea of what I'm talking about. I have been playing since Generation 4's Platinum metagame, and I have seen anti-Smogon sentiment from my very early days because I started on YouTube. Matter of fact, some of the reason I left YouTube for Smogon in the first place back then was because I was sick of the Bush League mentality of don't use good Pokemon because they're cheap, and I was more interested in the competitive side, really playing to win. If you want to play it for fun, hey, go for it. But if you want to play for the best competition, then you cannot have such a random factor. And I scrolled through some comments and I saw, well, Dynamaxing is random. Have you ever heard of a critical hit? Which is just a skewed way of looking at it, I think. So, anyway, getting back to the original point, I promise I'll come back to this. I've seen all the anti-Smogon sentiment in the world. Back in the day, it was no Scarm Bliss Cress. And then when Platinum came around, oh, Smogon is evil and wants you to use Scizor on every team for whatever reason. And then in the following generations, oh, you have to use Rotom Wash and Landorus Therian and other nonsense like that. So, when you are truly competitive, you want to do everything you can to win. And part of that involves using the best Pokemon for the job. I mean, look, I'm a huge fan of something like Luxray, right? But I would never bring Luxray to a serious Gen 4 match because it's just not good. And I know anyone who's ever played Gen 2 games remembers Karen telling you that you have to win with your favorites. It's a nice idea, it really is. But just like you would not be able to beat someone who knew what they were doing using an Ubers team with an OU team more often than not, then you would not be able to beat a team of Gen 4 OU Pokemon with a Luxray. And you can take this into every following tier. Now, a couple things. I'm not saying you need OU Pokemon to win. Such as in Gen 6 OU, Nidoking is UU. It might even be RUBL or something. But it is terrific in OU. It has a niche. If you're using something, its goal should be to be as effective as possible, and nothing else does what Nidoking does in Gen 6 OU. And that's why it has a niche despite not being OU. Another thing I want to mention is that one-time counters, they don't count. Like, you can say, oh, well, you can counter Dynamax Gyarados by using, I don't know, Freeze-Dry Lapras or something. For every Dynamax Gyarados your Freeze-Dry Lapras counters, you are losing games because you're using Lapras. So, not to mention, Gyarados gets Power Whip, and so if you have to use inferior Pokemon to counter something broken, then that's kind of a symbol of the original thing being broken. Another great argument I've heard a million times, well, it's not broken because you can use it too. Well, by that rationale, we should unban everything in the game because, sure, my opponent can use Arceus, but so can I. If I wanted to play Ubers, I would play Ubers, which can be a great tier. I'm very fond of Gen 4 Ubers, but it's not as balanced as OU for a reason, just by virtue of everything being so overpowered and insane and smashing together. So, just because you beat something that they said was broken one or two times. I mean, congratulations. The day Salamence was banned from Gen 4 OU, my buddy played a guy using Immense, and he beat it with a Glare Arbok. That does not mean Arbok is good, nor does it mean that Arbok is a good Salamence check, nor does it mean that Salamence did not deserve to be banned. So, I think those are all the general Bush League. I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but if you want to be competitive, then you have to have some level of elitism. And I'm not saying if you're not the greatest player in the universe, then you are not worthy of playing on Smogon. That's nonsense. Smogon loves new players coming in and showing their stuff. Several of the best players right now are very new in the grand scheme of things. They're not all fossils like me. So that is also not an argument being made. Anyway, so if I think of any more general Bush League comments. Oh, the defining mechanic of the generation. I mean, this is just not competitive. Look, as long as you're not changing how the mechanics actually work, Sleep Claws being a very complicated exception, that's another whole can of worms. But as long as you're not changing things like, I think that Genesect would not be broken if it only had 90 speed or something like that. As long as you're not changing Pokemon stats or the base powers of moves or their effects or doing things like taking out Paralysis's full paralysis rate and things like that, then that's fair game. And trying to preserve some... I mean, the fact that we ban Pokemon and have clauses like Sleep and Evasion and Oko, that is all in the name of removing as much randomness as we can from the game while still playing Pokemon so that the better player can win. And again, if you're more casual and you just want to play with your favorite Pokemon, hey, go nuts. But for those of us who like competition, and that's a fair amount of us, judging from the size of Smogon's tournaments, then we try to have some order and make it as least chaotic as possible. That was badly phrased, but you get the gist. Like, if I wanted to play a game that... Look, we're not getting rid of critical hits or anything. But what we can... because that would be changing the mechanics of the game. But what we can do is limit moves like Double Team and Guillotine that just turn Pokemon into pure guessing fests. Or not guessing fests, more... randomness fests, as in, well, hope I win and hit. And no, this isn't perfect. I know someone's going to say, well, what about Scald Burns? And trust me, I hate Scald. What about Sleep Turns? There's always going to be some element of randomness to a game of Pokemon, which is absolutely true. We just have to try and get rid of the most extreme, ridiculously detrimental things that really inhibit competition. And there is no perfect way to look at it, but the way Smogon does it is by looking at the best players and seeing what they think, because they probably know what they're talking about, and going off some sort of consensus. Again, it's not perfect. It doesn't claim to be, but the system generally works so far, and most arguments against it are not great. Also, I would like to address the idea that Smogon is a cult with a bunch of people, just scheming together to make everyone use Landorus Therian or whatever the most popular Pokemon in OU is. It's not. They use it because they want to win, but a lot of Smogon players don't agree with a lot of Smogon's tiering decisions. It's not some weird organization that plots to ruin all the fun in Pokemon. I can't believe anyone would actually think that after having looked into it at all, but never mind. So, Dynamax, why is it so stupid? Why does it need to leave forever? Well, there has been a lot of controversy in the last couple of generations over the power of Mega Pokemon and Z-moves. And especially Z-moves because of their randomness factor. And this is not random like RNG is random, like the critical hit rate. As a side note, part of what makes great players great is their ability to deal with RNG. And I know that might sound weird. I'm not saying stupid outplay the coin flip nonsense like when Aegislash was OU in Gen 6 and 7. And people legitimately thought there was no problem with the incredibly limited bad ways to deal with it. I'm talking knowing when they don't have to risk a critical hit and not risking their most important Pokemon. I'm talking knowing that they have a chance to win if their opponent fully paralyzes just once and going for it and things of that nature. So Pokemon has never been about getting guaranteed wins. Think about it like this. If you have 10 games where all you have to do is hit a Draco Meteor to win, should you win all 10 games? Statistically, you should win 9 out of those 10 games. And that's ignoring all the other chances that happened so far. It's very rare that a game of Pokemon is purely 100% no luck, unless all the damage being done is entry hazards and seismic toss and leech seed and stuff like that. Most attacking moves can crit. There's a lot of secondary effects activating or not activating. If you get hit by 10 flamethrowers, the chances are one of them is going to burn, and things of that nature. So the things that get banned, the reason we don't just strip every single secondary effect in the game, besides it, changing how the game would actually work, making it so we could not feasibly replicate it on the cart, is because games are generally not revolving around those percentage chances. Some people might point to past gens and say, well, what about Gen 6 when, Calm Mind, Clefable, Thunder Wave, paralysis rates define games? And, most of the time the answer is you just have to get better at dealing with it. If your best way of dealing with Clefable is full paralysis and stuff like that, then you're just doing it wrong. And again, elitism when it comes to deciding our tiers, which then affect the tournaments we play in, I think it's a necessary evil. I would never shit on someone for not being a Pokemon genius. Pokemon is hard to get good at, but at the same time, that's why you have to have some semblance of skill in knowing what you're talking about if you want to contribute to the metagame, which is being decided by some of the best players around. And that's why you could also, if you felt so strongly about Dynamax, you could also attempt to make voting requirements and vote. And there were that 13% that voted no ban, including some very respectable players. One of the best OU players in the last several years, in fact, was a notable anti-ban, and I think there were a couple others that I don't quite remember. But so it's not the Smogon hive mind of, we want to ban all fun and whatever other nonsense for Licify Petals when he's screaming at the top of his lungs. I don't know what the point of that is. But that's why I couldn't get through more than like 20 seconds of that one video. Anyway, so why is Dynamax too much? I mean, look, we don't want to ban too much. I personally have no problem with stripping the game down to the bare bones in the name of competition. If I'm playing competitive Pokemon in a tournament to win, I want the skill to be rewarded as much as possible. But I recognize not everyone is as extreme as me in this regard. As well as some people say, look, we can't ban too much. It's just not done. So I recognize that I am in the minority here. However, Dynamax, very few people are okay with this. And all you have to do is watch one of the many, many Sword and Shield laddering videos to see why. So the controversy over Megas and Z moves. Imagine if you kind of cram both those together, but it could be any Pokemon. And not only that, you doubled their bulk. And there's just, I'll link this thread in the description. You can go over all these posts that players more in tune with the metagame than myself expanded on. But it's just absolutely ridiculous because not only do their moves get jacked up, not to extreme effects, we're not talking Z-move level powers, but they do get jacked up nonetheless, and they summon field effects, and yikes. Not to mention, the doubled HP is absurd because it's not even like it's riskless. Like a Z-move Magearna doesn't suddenly get doubled bulk. and they can't even be phased out, which that really, really is too much because it's not like, let's say if you blow your Z move at the wrong time, then you're done. And there, obviously, you can blow your Dynamax at the wrong time, so there is skill involved in making the most use out of it. However, there's skill involved used in literally everything. Otherwise, there would be no distinction between Pokemon. I mean, if look, if I face some guy with my OU team and he has Arceus, Darkrai, and a bunch of other Ubers, but he doesn't know what he's doing, I'm probably going to beat him. So that's not really an argument against. So, we know the Pokemon get bulked out, they get stronger, they can summon field effects that make them even harder to counter, and they can't be phased, which is too much. And possibly the most disgusting thing, I think, that really adds an element of randomness, which is, again, not desirable if you want to be competitive. Otherwise, we really are just out here flipping coins. The choice lock break. That's disgusting. And before I go on, I want to say, if you think that Pokemon is all random guessing, then you probably aren't that good. Or, to be slightly less mean and judgmental and elitist, then you probably don't have the fullest understanding of the game. Because if Pokemon was just guessing and randomness and bullshit and nonsense, then the best players would not win as consistently as they do. Skill is important in Pokemon, and it is not just random guessing. And if that's how you play, you will not win consistently. And winning consistently is kind of the name of the game. That's how skill is truly measured. Anyone can beat anyone on any given Sunday, or in any one game. And people can go on streaks and have a great tournament. But what really makes people good is being able to win consistently over a longer period of time. And if you view Pokemon as randomness and guessing and just randomly clicking buttons, then you're not going to have as much success. And that's the difference. So back to why randomness, now that we know that randomness is not desirable to have in a metagame, then the choice lock break is possibly the most egregious example. And this also is contributed to by the fact that Dynamax can be used on any Pokemon at any time. So it's like, well, this is the opportune time to screw my opponent over with XYZ incredibly strong Pokemon. I mean, look, choice Pokemon are really strong. They always have been. However, the drawback, of course, is that they're locked into their one move, and that makes it easier to play around them so that they can't just spam their strongest move over and over in any given situation. However, it's really tough to deal with when you're trying to play around a choice Pokemon and they just suddenly go, oh, I'm not choice anymore, and you lost that Pokemon that you really need. And not only did you lose that Pokemon, my incredibly dangerous threat is now even scarier because of all the other buffs that it has on top of it. With a double HP, can't be phased, effects brought on by moves. Oh, it's absolutely nuts. Things like Dracovish, and especially Galarian Darmanitan, and hell, even Ditto, making use of it is just incredibly, incredibly ridiculous. So, being able to play around choice moves with resistances and immunities, suddenly that can go out the window at any time. And you don't really have a great way of knowing when, because you could try and check to, bait them into Dynamaxing, but they just might not. And there's not really a good way of knowing. And having a good way of knowing or figuring it out within reasonable expectations you could have for something the opponent could do, that's what skill is all about. But when it could be anything at any time, and those options that could do that are all so nuclear, then that is when you start getting into a real clusterfuck of a metagame that's just not conducive to good play, because so much of the game is just like, well, the rest of it doesn't matter. because at any time I could just pop it and there it goes. And if it sounds like I'm describing Z moves, they are also similar, and that's why many people were against them, or at least their most egregious abusers. But at the same time, Z moves at least only one turn. I myself am not a great fan of Z moves, so it follows that I'm really against them when every single Pokemon can have them at any time for several turns in a row. So, I mean, to me, it's obvious for anyone with eyes that if you've been playing the metagame, you see how absurd Dynamax is. Sure, it's fun. Sure, it's the generation's defining feature. Game Freak clearly does not really care about singles at all, and they evidence it more every single year. With I think Wi-Fi battles have like a 20-minute limit now, maximum, and that's not so. Come on. So it's clearly geared more toward VGC, where field effects reign supreme, and the fact that everything's a little less broken if there's two Pokemon on the field at a time because you can double target and things like that. I still think it'll be nuts, but I don't really know anything about VGC, and yeah, the put up or shut up approach, you know, for VGC, you're really not going to get Nintendo to change it at this point. But with Smogon, we don't have to put up or shut up with anything Nintendo hands us from on high, because we're not bound to the constraints of Nintendo's wacky desires. So, generational identity, that's not competitive. That's aesthetic. That is not steeped in, I want the better player to be Jesus. Sorry. That argument is not steeped in a desire for players who play better and make good teams to be rewarded for it. That is steeped in, I want more pretty colors to choose from. It's why people didn't want Weather banned from Black and White, which I think was a mistake, or at least Rain, because they want more fun critters to pick from. And competitiveness be damned, we just want to have fun, and that goes against. Back in the day, then, you know, it used to be a kind of sneering put down to say to anyone who was more invested in, I want to use this, how dare you ban it, to the, you know, ban of Blaziken or whatever, was, well, if you want to have fun so bad, go to Cerebi. So, yeah, I think I've said pretty much everything I wanted to say. So, good riddance to Dynamax. Gyarados, Hawlucha, Corviknight, whatever else, just anything at any time. Galarian Darmanitan, my god. But and some people say, well, why not just ban the most problematic Dynamax Pokemon? And the fact is, Dynamaxing is too much to deal with at its core, with the fact that anything can do it at any time, and you can just screw your opponent completely. With very little way of being able to fight back against it reliably. And it really centers the game around what is pure guessing. There are very few situations in Pokemon that are pure 50-50. I really dislike when someone says, oh, I had to win some 50-50s for game. Very, very rarely is that true. At the end of the game, then sure, sometimes it really is a true 50-50. But most of the time, I think that's viewing it wrong. And very, very often, you can avoid those 50-50 situations if you if you play with enough heads-up awareness to avoid those situations. But with Dynamaxing, then the power of it is such that you very often do have such genuine 50-50 situations where it's like every single turn is walking on eggshells, and a 50% chance that they Dynamax or you Dynamax, and whoever blows it first is just disadvantaged, and it's too much of a disadvantage. It's too much to deal with. It's unfair. It is not conducive to competitive Pokemon. And I know I said I would stop talking about Verlisify, but I remember something he said that was like, Smoke is the worst thing for what real competitive Pokemon. Like, what is real competitive Pokemon battling at that point, if not VGC. Like, if you say that VGC is the only real thing, at least I get it. But there is no real battling. And, but I don't know what metric he's using. Again, he could just be putting on an act. Anyway, so I think that's all I have to say at this point. Dynamaxing, good riddance. Hope it never comes back. It was thoroughly miserable playing against it, and I will not be sorry to see it take a long walk off a short bridge. So, thanks for watching. I hope you guys are as thrilled for Dynamax to be gone as I am, because in the tournaments I'll be participating in, Pokemon is a random enough game already. We don't need this adding to the pile. So, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.